You look at marketing and the millennials, and that's what they're all looking for. They want the place, they want the story, they want something that their mom and dads aren't going to be drinking and haven't consumed, and they want to be the first one to post the pictures on Instagram so all their friends. So if they go down to the Snebblies in Miami and they're sitting under a tiki hut drinking an avocado and mango wine, this is awesome.
Instagrammable.
Right. But are they going to buy a case and ship it home?
I'm Robin Sussingham, and this is The Zest. Citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm, The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. It might be one of the state's best-kept secrets, but Florida winemaking is a billion-dollar industry. There are dozens of wineries across the state employing nearly 100,000 people with university research departments dedicated to viticulture. How can this hot, humid, fungus-friendly state support successful wine production? We have some experts here to talk to us about Florida wine. Vince Shook is president of Florida Orange Groves Winery, a tropical berry and citrus winery. Chuck Hollweg is a non-commercial hobbyist, grape grower, and winemaker. Gina Birch is host of Grape Minds podcast from WGCU, the NPR member station in Fort Myers, and they brought samples. We're going to be trying some of their wines. Vince, Chuck, Gina, thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So let's start off. I want to start off with the history of winemaking, because when I was getting ready for this show, I was very surprised to learn about the history of Florida winemaking, which I thought would have been just, started in the last couple decades. But who wants to tell us about that?
Well, it goes back to when the Spaniards came. They brought the grapes, and in some aspects, I've talked to different people when I've been doing stories about Florida wine. They say Florida was one of the first states in the nation to grow grapes.
I mean, I have heard even more than that. I heard that it is the cradle of winemaking for the country, that the French Huguenots,
Yes.
So I've read a couple different reports, but the French Huguenots
back in the 16th century.
The French Huguenots at Fort Caroline in 1564 was
Right.
the first documented. Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. Of course, those grapes didn't work, the vines that they brought, because of what you mentioned, the humidity, the climate, and so that's when they started switching, and they found the muscadines, the grapes that were native to Florida.
They found the muscadine grapes, which were native here, and started making wine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think somebody, a British admiral, came and reported that they had something like 1,200 gallons of wine. They were starving to death, but they had wine. Right? So Vince?
Yeah. One of the good things about the muscadine variety here in Florida is that it has resistance to what's called Pierce's disease. Mm-hmm. And Pierce's disease is simply a bacteria that gets inside the veins of the vines, multiplies, and then it strangles the flow of nutrients and water to the vine. And fortunately, muscadines have resistance to that. The vinifera, like your Merlots, your Chardonnays, things like that, they do not have a resistance to that. So that's why we can't grow vinifera here in Florida.
So that is the species of grape that all the traditional Bordeaux, Pinot Noir, all the things that you might have heard of, that comes from the species vinifera?
Yes, that's the classification as opposed to like our muscadine variety here in Florida.
So it's a completely different species. It's native to Florida, and it loves the heat and the humidity.
It's kind of interesting because some of the people that I've talked to in the different universities that are doing the studies on trying to get the gene for resistance to be placed into the Merlots and the Chardonnays and things like that. So we say, well, why? Or is there so much research in Florida on that? And they said, well, here we have the best bugs in the world. We have the highest humidity. We have the most fungus. We have the most scale. And our weeds, they're just absolutely fantastic. So if they can design a plant that's going to survive and flourish in that environment, they've pretty much got it licked.
It's sturdy.
Yes.
And those
Very much
thicker
so.
skins, too, on those muscadines help protect against a lot of the disease and bugs as well.
Yeah, Chuck, talk about the muscadine grapes. Now, you're a grape grower. What are you growing?
We're a hobbyist grape grower, actually in Port Richey, and we're growing 3 different cultivars. I have 2 whites and a red, cultivar obviously being a species.
Cultivar of muscadine?
Of muscadine grapes.
Okay.
So one of our cultivars is a Carlos, which is a white wine, which when it's made properly is much like a Chardonnay.
Wow.
Except it has that kind of musky muscadine pop to it.
That's very distinct.
They're very distinct. And then we have a Noble, which is a smaller red grape, smaller red berry, which we use a lot of times for our grape sangria. Makes a great sangria wine. I'm sure Vince knows that. And I admire Vince and his operation due to he does a lot of things with muscadine grapes most growers don't. So my aspect from a hobbyist is I'm not financially involved in it to the point that I can't just play with my grapes. So we do a lot of blending. We do a lot of if I have some new cultivars I find coming up, I still have room to put more rows in. I'll put a few plants in to see what happens, then see how that grape develops. University of Florida brought the Delicious to market, 7 years ago, I believe. Dr. Dennis Gray from the University of Florida Viticulture bred that in a Popka. And he gave a presentation, which Vince and I heard at the Florida Grape Growers Association annual conference. And I said, Dr. Gray, how did you get the name Delicious for that grape? And wouldn't you know, he said, well, everybody who had tried them said they were delicious, so it stuck. Mm-hmm. So, it's that kind of thing that runs our industry. It's kind of a seat of your pants, a tremendous amount of science behind it, considering it took him almost 15 years to bring that grape variety or that grape cultivar to market.
No, they're working on it at the University of Florida, as you mentioned. Also, Florida A&M University has a viticulture department. They're having a grape harvest festival coming up. And so I was, there's a lot of research going on to make the grapes, I guess, more suitable for Florida. And so what's the difference between a hobbyist, Chuck, and a commercial grower? Because, Chuck, you say you're a hobbyist, but it sounds like you're pretty serious. I mean, you're growing quite a few acres and you're making wine, and I guess are you selling wine on a limited basis? What's the difference here? Big difference.
The difference is we're not licensed. It's a night and day thing. Licensing requires a lot of oversight by the TTB, Tax Tobacco Bureau. A lot of compliance goes with that. We do not sell it. We make just enough for our personal consumption and friends who visit us.
Oh, you don't sell.
Yeah. So can we go to your house after the show? And
You're welcome, and we brought samples. So,
Gina, what about Florida wine? How do we judge the quality? Are there competitions? Are there awards that are given to Florida wine where they would be maybe compared to each other rather than compared to a Napa Valley winery or a New York State winery?
Yeah, most all states have some type of competition. Now, they do it a lot at the state fairs, and we do have that type of competition here in the state of Florida. And I think what makes Florida also unique is, besides the grapes, it's the tropical fruit wines. So then you're talking about a whole nother category of wines and how they're made and the quality and perception. I think Florida nationally and even within our own borders, people have a perception that there's not any good wine. It's all kiwi or it's all and that doesn't mean that the kiwi's not good. It's just not grapes. So people are looking at it differently, and sometimes, and it's apples and oranges. It's kiwi and grapes. It's not the same.
It requires a change in your mindset.
Right.
So, I can see how a lot of wine connoisseurs would look down their nose at a mango wine or an avocado wine I've heard of.
They do make that in Miami.
They make that in Miami. Sweet avocado wine at Schnebly Wine.
Schnebly, they mix it with mango.
Yeah. So you could see how a sommelier in a fine French restaurant might say, we would never carry a sweet avocado wine. But it does require a different mindset because it's apple and oranges. Vince, I want you to talk about, because you guys at Florida Orange Groves Winery, you make wine out of tropical fruit.
Yes, we make 43 different kinds of different tropical citrus and berry wines.
I want you to justify that for me.
Okay. Let's start way back about 35 years ago, and there was a study that came out in the Wall Street Journal, and it was the first study on wine consumption in the United States. At that time, 11% of the people in the United States consumed all the wine that was sold. 40% of the population said they had tried wine, but they were not drinking it, and the rest of the people did not drink, alcoholic beverages. What caught our eye in that study, and we were in the citrus business at the time, squeezing the different juices and everything. I hadn't been out of college too long, so we were still trying to make wine out of the different citrus juices, as we did in our dorm rooms. Anyway, that study was interesting because they went back to the 40% sample that said they had tried wine and they weren't drinking it, and they asked them one simple question: why aren't you drinking it? Number one answer: it does not taste like what it is made out of. Number two,
didn't taste like a grape to them.
Exactly. Number two, it wasn't sweet enough. Number three, we don't like the taste of alcohol. So if you look at that as an entrepreneur and you say, well, my goodness, that is a potential market that is 4 times as big as the existing wine market in the United States, therein lies the appeal for the type of wine that we are making. It took us 10 years to figure out how to make our key lime wine out of 100% key lime juice. So this has been quite an evolution for us. It's been 30 years in the making to get where we are today in the tropicals side of the variety production especially. But we always like to say, when we're pitching our wines for sale to, whether it be restaurants or whatever, that mindset that you're talking about is the hardest thing to get over. Okay, so we always say that, look, our wines will bring flavor and style characteristics to your meals that regular grape wine can never hope to accomplish. So you pair them with the right foods, and you're off to the races. When I give my talks at Disney, because we're a good partner with Disney, one of the things I talk about is we make a cranberry wine. I said, now, what are you going to pair that with? We have Thanksgiving coming up. Turkey, mashed potatoes, and gravy, and cranberry wine. And there isn't a person in the audience that doesn't look left or right and go like, oh, yeah, that does sound good. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're after. We're after that market.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So how many, like you mentioned key lime wine, how many key limes would you need to make a bottle of wine? Like how much fruit do you need to make the wine?
The rule of thumb, and it varies up and down depending on which type of fruit that we're making, but generally it goes 10 pounds.
10 pounds for one bottle,
right.
of wine.
Yeah.
So is that expensive, or does it depend on the fruit?
It is, and that's one of the problems that we have, is that grapes basically are, one of the least expensive things to make wine out of.
Really?
When you go to red raspberries, blackberries, mangoes, key limes, things like that, you have a whole different production process that's involved in getting the juice. Like, for example, mangoes, you got to put them, or how we used to do it, you put them in a commercial potato peeler, rough up the skins on the outside, then you have to enzyme the meat of the fruit off the stone. You have to get those stones out of there. Then you have to, press the mixture that you have left to get the juice to go into the fermenters. It's quite a process. So, and mangoes are a lot more expensive than grapes are. So,
but you can't charge a lot for mango wine. People won't pay it. One reason I think these are attractive wines, Gina, right, is because people would see them, a fruit wine, as an affordable wine.
Typically, yes. And, one of the things that makes some of the grapes, the wines made from grapes out of Napa, expensive is, as you pointed, it's not the fruit, it's the real estate. It's what they're paying in mortgage for that really nice piece of property that's high up on the mountain that has all of this history and these high ratings. So they're able to charge $150 for this great Napa Cab when really, if those same grapes and that same style was somewhere else, it might be a $20 bottle of wine. So there is disparity there as well. It's not just with like the mangoes versus the other fruit. I think it's with the industry in general.
That's interesting because I never thought of that. You're paying for that expensive real estate. You're also paying for that terroir, right?
Yes.
You can't transfer that to Florida. You can't transfer that to somewhere else. So Chuck, you are using grapes, and have you ever thought about using fruit, or do you ever for your hobby?
The grapes are enough of a challenge. The fruit is a challenge. I was listening to Vince on how much it takes to make a gallon or a bottle of wine. Our rule of thumb is 12 to 14 pounds of muscadine grapes per gallon of wine. A gallon makes 5 bottles of wine. So there's the price comparison. It's a lot less expensive for us. When I do my crusher takes the stems out. I'm left with some seeds as residue. When I have my primary fermentation, that's easy to rack off of. We can pull a wine off of that very simply. So it's a much easier process. So,
Chuck, you are retired. You're a retired financial wealth advisor.
Correct.
Private wealth advisor, I think is how you put it. So how much have you put into this all this winemaking equipment? How much would it set somebody back to start making wine?
You mean to start a vineyard and then buy the equipment?
You've got the whole thing, don't you?
Yeah.
You've got the vineyard and the equipment.
Correct. Yeah.
The bottling and everything? You have
We do everything,
line?
yeah.
Okay.
In fact, my wife is our packaging manager. So you'll see our labels.
If you don't mind, I'm going to ask an intrusive question. But, how much do you think you have invested in all of your winemaking?
Gosh, I don't know. It's under $10,000 probably.
Really?
Yeah.
With the acreage and the grapes? And
Well, no, the acreage is different. Yeah, the acreage
Okay.
adds another 60, 70 to it, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
But you love seeing the grapes out there.
I do. They're my babies.
How many acres do you have in grapes?
We just have one.
1 acre. And it
Correct.
makes all those, they're very prolific then, muscadine.
They are. Yeah, they are.
Okay. And then what about you, Vince? How many acres and do you have groves yourself or do you buy the fruit? How do you work it?
For most of our wines that we make, we actually purchase the fruit. So there's no way that we can have
You don't have to have
mango
groves
and
okay.
key lime groves and things like that. So we work with producers that are willing to squeeze the juice to our specifications. So we do have some land that we lease for muscadine vineyards that get us qualified as a Florida farm winery. So we have that we deal with. But most of the juices that we're getting now that we used to squeeze on site, we're big enough now that we can have specifications and enough volume that we can go to outside producers and have them provide the juice to us.
So you don't have your own orange groves anymore then?
No,
or
we do not.
grapefruit?
And you see that segmentation coming like out in California a lot. Everything is being broken up. You'll have the people that actually grow the grapes, the vineyard owners. Then you'll have the actual wineries that are making the wine, and then you'll have the distribution networks of the people that are selling the wine. So they're breaking it up. It's a huge undertaking, as I'm sure Chuck will tell you, to try to do all 3 or 4 aspects of the operation.
Is that new, Gina? Because I always thought, thinking of California wineries or even New York State, I always pictured a vast acreage of vineyards and then the winery right there that makes the wines. Is that not how it is anymore?
There still is a lot of that. There's still some family-owned wines, but with the popularity and the clout and the people from Silicon Valley who now have extra money and they don't know what to do with it, and they want to go buy a vineyard or buy some land, and then they hire people to do all the work for them. That's just kind of the way the culture, the things are shifting out, in Napa specifically. Now, you go over to some place like Spain, there's still a lot of family-owned. It's been in the family for a long time. They own the land, they own the grapes, they own the equipment, they own everything. So that's why some of those wines are going to be a little lower price. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're any less value. It just means that they don't have to spend all that money on hiring everybody and sourcing everything out.
And one thing I saw was there was wineries in Florida that actually didn't even use Florida produce. They just brought juice in from elsewhere.
Lake Ridge might be one of those. They do have a lot of acreage. They do grow a lot of grapes. They're in Claremont. And the winemaker there is the one who worked with the University of Florida to come up with a new grape, the Blanc de Bois. And it's also being grown in Texas now. And they make a sparkling wine out of that. But they've got this beautiful rolling property, rolling hills, and it used to be orange groves too. And so they use a lot of the hybrid grapes that Vince and Chuck were talking about, but they have Chardonnay and they have Merlot. So they're sourcing those grapes and they're bringing them in. Whether they're bringing, I don't know if they're pressed or how they're brought in. If they're pressed in California and the juice is shipped, a lot of times that's done. And then they do the fermenting and the blending and everything on property. So it can still say bottled in Florida or Florida wine, even though the grapes weren't grown on property. So that happens a lot. That happens all over the place too.
I would think, just as a tourist, that's not why you would go to a Florida winery, is to drink grapes made from California.
I think it supplements what they do.
It must supplement it.
So
and maybe some people only will accept something like a Chardonnay and not a kiwi or a key lime wine.
Or if they have a specific taste, I mean, it's all relative, right? It's all in. The best wine is the wine that you like. If you like sweet wine, great. If someone doesn't like sweet wine and they go to one of these wineries, then they have an option. They've got something else that they can drink and purchase and help support our economy.
And that's why we make, like we say, 43 different kinds, because you're right, people do have certain things that they like, certain tastes that they like. And so you try to offer something for everybody, but, there's a lot of different tastes out there. You don't hit everybody's palate,
So I wanted to talk about how you feel. You mentioned restaurants briefly, Vince, and there must be some frustration with trying to get your wines accepted by restaurants, local restaurants, Florida restaurants, who kind of they look down on Florida wines and they won't sell them. How do you handle that?
Well, we have a lot of restaurant chains now in Florida that, in particular, our tropicals appeal to. Okay, but the big problem is not that they don't like the wines or that they look down on them. The problem is the pricing, and we cannot meet their price points when it comes to purchasing inexpensive wines from, whether they're coming in from Chile or wherever, So the globalization has affected the industry here in Florida from that standpoint, the competition, a lot of other factors that go into trying to make Florida wine economically viable.
Do you all ever, I understand that, but do you all ever try to talk to sommeliers from, say, Burns Steakhouse, which has 500,000 or bottles of wine, whatever it is, but they won't carry Florida wine?
You're going to find the mindset really entrenched in high-end restaurants like that.
Right. They just won't put it on the menu. Go
ahead,
Gina.
And I have to interrupt briefly because I was at a higher-end restaurant in Marco Island at the JW Marriott recently, and the restaurant was called Ario, and the sommelier was really interested and in tune with trying to find wines that weren't on everybody's list. She didn't want the Camus or the some of the other big wines that people know all the time and that are comfortable and they can go and order. She had 2 Florida wines on there. They were both from Lake Ridge. There was a red and a white.
Really?
The red was a cab. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Are there any local grapes or indigenous grapes or hybrid grapes that are blended in there? I don't know. I did not get to read the back of the bottle. I did try one of the whites, and it did have muscadine in it. And she served it with a key lime pie for dessert.
Perfect.
So it went perfectly. Mm-hmm. I could definitely taste the muskiness from the muscadine, and then also some of the tropical flavors, and it was seamless. So something like that, it's just getting the right buyer to taste it and get it, and then getting them to train their staff to try to serve it and turn the diners on to it. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there and collect dust. Mm-hmm. So it's a big task.
Right, Gina, and there's something just about the experience of trying a Florida wine, right? I mean, you're looking for something different, as you said this restaurant was.
Ario.
It's even a souvenir, or it's a feeling of the place where you are, or even a funny label.
I think that's big right now, and you look at marketing and the millennials, and that's what they're all looking for. They want the place, they want the story, they want something that their mom and dads aren't going to be drinking and haven't consumed, and they want to be the first one to post the pictures on Instagram so all their friends. So if they go down to the Snebblies in Miami and they're sitting under a tiki hut drinking an avocado and mango wine, this is awesome.
Instagrammable.
Right. But are they going to buy a case and ship it home? Are they going to, if they see it in Publix or one of the supermarkets, buy a bunch of it? Or is it just that experience? And is that experience enough? Are you selling enough wine to make it enough? That's a conundrum that the gentleman would probably be able to comment more on.
It is a conundrum. And you touched on something that really kind of sets off a spark in me, and that's being able to ship the wine home. Okay. One of the huge problems that the wine industry here in Florida and other states has is the regulatory environment. And I'm not sure whether most people are aware of it, but Amazon Wine shut down December 31st, 2017. And the reason they shut down is because of all the problems that they experience that we do as a small winery. You have to have licenses now to ship into all the other different states. Okay, and you have to pay excise tax and sales tax and any other kind of tax and gallon taxes, and keep all the records and send reports in every month to all these states with names and addresses of people that you sent to, how much they bought, and all this kind of stuff. So those regulations have been put in place by the large distributors mainly to keep business flowing through them, the product flowing through them on the way to the consumers. But in the case of Amazon Wine, you have the smaller wineries that signed up for the program, but there were so few that could comply with the regulatory problems with all the different states that is a program that failed. And that is one of the big pressures that we have trying to figure out how to get our product to people once they've come, tasted it here in Florida, once they get home. It's a big problem.
Oh, yeah, because shipping a case home is what people want to do
Exactly.
if they like it. So you aren't able to do that? Is that a problem for you? Or do you have to hire people to do all that regulatory stuff?
You're looking at the guy who handles it for our place. And we have 15 states that we're licensed to ship into. And we keep an eye on those sales each year to see whether all the license fees on top of all the taxes and everything make it worthwhile to continue to offer shipment into those states. So it's a constant problem, and it's a lot of work.
So
Spend a lot of weekends doing those things while the bureaucrats are home for the weekend.
Yeah. Vince, does the process for making a wine from fruit, from tropical fruit, does that differ a lot from the process of making it from grapes?
In the preparation of the juice, yes, but you're still trying to get the juice for the fermentation process. Like I say, it did take us a long time to learn how to make key lime wine from 100% key lime juice. All our tropicals and citrus and berry wines are made 100% from the juice that's indicated by the label. So they all do taste like what they're made out of, which was
important to you.
That was very important. So, the fermentation is pretty much like it is for a grape, making a grape wine. We do have some special yeast we've developed over the years that will enhance our type of production. We have applied for some patents on some of those yeast and production methods and things like that. So it's been a learning experience, and like I say, it's been a 30-year effort.
Do you share with other wineries, like Schnebley's we were talking about down in South Florida?
Not on any technical data, no.
Oh, so it's kind of private.
Yes. Once you spend all your time and effort developing those things, you'd like to keep it proprietary.
Yeah, proprietary. Okay, well, I think it's time to taste some of these wines.
All right.
While you're opening that up, Vince, one of your wines, Chuck, you mentioned there are some competitions for Florida wines.
Correct.
One's a big one at the Florida State Fair.
Florida State Fair.
Tell me about that.
Sure. That is promoted by the Florida Wine and Grape Growers Association, and we bring in the judges from outside, from many different schools, and we'll bring in both commercial and hobbyist wines. The hobbyist will be judged according to a different panel than the commercials will, so it's a pretty even competition.
So the hobbyist will just be for your pride.
Correct.
Because we won't, as drinkers, we won't get to try it.
Right,
but the commercial ones, I mean, is that publicized anywhere? Who wins the prizes?
It's in our publication, and Vince is one of our champion winners year after year. So, yeah. And
congratulations.
It always helps in your tasting room to have the medals and the trophies and the ribbons from the state fair.
Who are some of the best winemakers in the state?
I think Vince is one of our best in the fruit, hands down. I mean, the research and the quality wines they produce. Strong Tower is close to us. Most of the Florida wineries that have been around for a while specialize in a certain type, 1 or 2 or 3 types of grapes, cultivars of grapes. So they have the processing down on those particular grapes.
Why are muscadines considered sort of an inferior grape to, I don't know, a Cabernet, the traditional grape that you'd think of in winemaking? Or you don't think of it that way anymore.
It's a perception to start with, I think. That's the big thing to overcome, because I find a lot of people want to taste our wines. They come over to the house and, we'll pop a bottle of wine. And they get this funny face, well, that doesn't taste like what I'm expecting. And there's your problem. So,
in what way is it different? We're about to find out because we're going to taste some wine.
You'll taste it. I'm going to let you taste it, and you be the judge and let me know.
Okay. Well,
It's just a very distinct flavor, I
You want me
think.
to open a bottle of muscadine?
Yes,
Yeah.
open a bottle of muscadine for sure.
You know,
And what have you, Vince? What have you brought?
We brought our number one seller, which is our Hurricane Class 5. That is a blend of 5 of our different tropical wines that we make. So that one has mango wine in it, key lime wine, passion fruit wine, watermelon wine,
Wow.
and pineapple wine.
Wow. So I had mentioned the labels before because I think that's part of the appeal, isn't it? Especially
Yes.
as a souvenir.
Oh, absolutely.
And this label, Hurricane Class 5, has a big picture of maybe it was. Which hurricane was that? Looks like Irma, maybe?
I think that was Irma. We try to change it depending
does
on what
look
our
like
latest
Irma, yeah.
nemesis has been in the state.
The latest hurricane is on there. And, if just looking at that gives you some anxiety, which it does to me, then you
gonna
drink
it
some of that
faster?
wine. So these are made, or let's see, you have this black gold. This is a blackberry. Oh, so
That's
these
a
are all
blackberry.
fruit that you brought.
Yes, and I have a sample of the key lime, too, if you'd like to try that.
Okay,
That's,
what's your best seller?
The Hurricane Class 5, followed by the key lime.
Okay. And
And-
why is it called key limen?
Because when we first started to make it, we couldn't figure out how to make it out of, like I said, 100% key lime juice. So it was a blend of some things in the ferment, mainly grapefruit. Okay. So the name stuck with the licensing, and after 10 or 15 years of marketing it as key lime, and we didn't want to change the name.
So even though it is now all key lime
It's all 100%
juice.
key lime, and it says so on the label.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this is Hurricane. Describe to me what's in this.
Okay, so this is a blend of 5 of the different tropicals that we make. So we make each wine separately and then blend it. So this has, like I said, it has our passion fruit wine, pineapple wine, mango wine, key lime wine, and watermelon wine, all blended together.
And this smells like something like a tropical fruit that you've never smelled before, but just delicious.
Right.
You can't really put your finger on it.
Exactly. And
There's
usually if you
some-
take a couple sips, the first time you'll get a finish of maybe pineapple. The second, you'll hit that key lime or passion fruit finish. And then, depending on what your
Pineapple's
sensitivity is.
stronger. Maybe the pineapple's coming out. The mango. I'm just smelling.
My wife and I use this a lot when we have a party. Because we'll put it in a pitcher with a wedge of watermelon in there, mango sliced up, key lime sliced up. I mean,
This is
it's
just a
winner.
party in a cup.
There you
Vince. This is punch. I mean, it tastes delicious. It's delicious. This would be a great party wine.
Like that?
Yeah,
Good.
I get a lot of when you were talking about pineapple, I smelled a lot of it first, and I
Right.
tasted a lot of it at first. But now I'm getting that passion fruit and
There
that
you go.
mango, just kind of
little bit of the
wafting
key
all
lime.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Getting that
nice.
at the end.
So this is a good, we like to call it escapist wine for Florida. When customers come down, tourists, okay, mainly, they're looking for the Florida escapist experience. A lot of times I tell people, when they ask me, what are you selling? I tell them that that's really what we're selling is escapism. Like Jimmy Buffett sells it in the form of his music, we're selling it in the form of our
This is
wine.
pool wine.
Yeah, I could drink a lot of this.
People have.
Well, I don't know. It's sweet. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it, I could right now, but it is sweet.
Well,
So-
it's funny because you mentioned drinking a lot of it. If you notice, it doesn't taste like it has any alcohol in it. That hits another one of our.
It's 10% though. I'm looking
10,
at it there.
10
so
to
that's
11%.
pretty,
Yeah,
that's
you're allowed 1.5% on either side of what the indication is on the label. Ours usually come in higher alcohol than what is on the label, but. I always get a kick at Thanksgiving when people come back in after Thanksgiving and they've had the cranberry wine and they say, well, you should have told us that packs a big punch. And I went, well, are you drinking it like it was cranberry juice or cranberry wine? I go like,
it goes down easy.
yeah. So,
Okay, so now how does 10% Chuck compare with other wines, other kinds of wine?
Well,
or beer?
typically the reds, the beefier reds, like the vinifera wines, will be 12 to almost 13%.
Okay.
The whites, like what Vince is serving here and what I have here, are probably 10 to 11%. And it's all a process of the fermentation, how much sugar we start with, what your Brix levels are, Brix being the sugar content in the grape. The higher the Brix, generally the higher the alcohol.
So it's not that there's so much more alcohol in it. It's just that it goes down more like just a fruit juice or a punch or something that you may not be as careful about.
Correct.
Okay, so we've got the key lime, the original key lime, which is key lime wine, 100% from key lime juice. Let's try it.
And the key lime pairs perfectly with our Florida seafood dishes. So it's a little bit higher in acid content. So if you have something with a glaze or a cheese sauce or something like that, it cleanses your palate between bites of food. Very, very Florida.
Okay. A fried grouper sandwich.
Oh, yes.
And some key lime wine.
There you go.
That's one of the first things I noticed, that this does have nice acidity to it. Mm-hmm. So, and that's one of the keys, as you said, to going with food. And I wanted something kind of salty and maybe a little fatty to cut through that with.
Yeah, we have a good passion fruit wine that fits that bill too. Mm-hmm. It's a different type of tartness than the key lime, and but we sell a lot of all of them.
Yeah, there's a little tartness. I can feel it now,
but
enough sweetness that
for that crowd that likes a little bit. Then we have our blackberry wine, which is really good.
Okay,
and
this is blackberry.
This is made from a special type of blackberries. It took us a long time to figure out which variety of blackberry that we wanted to use to make this wine. So.
Now, blackberries won't grow in Florida, will they?
No, we do buy these outside of the state and press them for the juice.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And this is in our top 5. So
I love how it smells.
Much more subtle smell, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's
And this one I brought the semi-sweet version today for you, but we also make a dry version of this.
Okay, I was wondering if you try to make any
yes.
dry.
We have a couple dry. We make a drier blueberry. We make a drier blackberry, things like that. So
I'm sure you sell a selling point for you, too, with this. When we were talking about traditional wines and fruit wines, is the 3 things you just mentioned, the blackberry, the blueberry. There are a lot of those big cabs and Petit Verdots and some of these big reds, traditional grapes that have these flavor profiles.
Absolutely.
So if people knew that and could wrap their head around that, then I think it's a better way to embrace it.
Right. Gina, do you think people are worried about their image?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the whole wine world is full of that. Full of people who are intimidated or who protest or who come in and they really don't know. You see the restaurants all the time. They don't know what they're ordering. They want a price point because they want to impress, or they feel like if it's in a certain price point, it's going to be a certain quality. And I agree with that. You say sweet, or you say this, or you say that, and it's kind of like taboo. Oh, well, if I really know about wine, or if I really like wine, or if I'm a real connoisseur, I can't have that.
I wouldn't want sweet wine. Right.
But then, I mean, you look at some of the great sweet wines all over the world, the Sauternes from France, and people pay a lot of money to drink those sweeter wines, and so there is a huge market for the sweet wine category, but it is a lot of pretense involved, I think.
I would love to see a blind taste test of some of these compared with some of those very expensive wines and see what happens.
We have one over the last 20-some years of entering the wines in competition. We've won over 374 medals for them. We have 12 best of shows. We have 12 best of class. We have 56 double gold medals. Yes, it's kind of an interesting category. So
I thought that was delicious, that blackberry.
You like that?
Yeah. All right, Chuck. You've got your wine out for us?
I'd love to serve some.
All right. So now you've got some. This is wine that you made yourself from your own grapes, and they're muscadine grapes?
That's correct. The first is a Carlos muscadine, a white grape. Ours, you'll find, has a little bit of a sweet pop up front, which I'd find people really, really enjoy.
So let me see your label. What do you call it?
Sure.
Chuck's wine or?
Le
Poulet. So why the French chickens?
Well, we have chickens, and we range the chickens in the vines, and the chickens do a lot for us. They're great for pest control, and obviously there's a little bit of fertilizer that goes along with it. They scratch so much, they aerate the soil. So
you're doing holistic farming over there.
Well, our version of it.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
So this is Le Poulet, Chuck Hollweg's wine.
Please enjoy.
Totally different than the fruit wines.
Correct.
And a very nice balance, by the way.
You like
I like
that?
that little musky
some
finish.
astringency at the end.
Yeah, so that's how I tell the muscadine.
Oh,
it's very
how?
Distinct finish.
Like an astringency at the end, or some tannins that you get at the end?
Probably tannins that have developed. This is a 3-year-old wine. It won a silver medal at the state fair 3 years ago.
And would you consider it a dry wine?
Yes, it's a dry wine. Most of my wines are dry.
I like the brightness at the end.
Mm-hmm.
See?
Just it makes you that little bit of salivation that you get after. I like that.
I don't know what to compare it to. It doesn't taste like a Chardonnay. It's a white wine, but it doesn't taste. What does it taste like?
You
What's
know,
the
I'm glad you
closest?
said that. It's like, why doesn't a Merlot taste like a Chardonnay? These are muscadine wines. Muscadine grapes are a standalone flavor, and the trick in making these wines is to understand the fruit and develop that flavor. And when we ferment, we use. I'll pick out from a panel of yeasts, as I'm sure Vince does, which yeast I want for that particular grape after I've been tasting the grape while we've been picking them. And then we'll support that yeast with different flavor enzymes or body-building enzymes or mouthfeel-building enzymes throughout the primary and secondary fermentation process. So you develop that particular flavor.
One thing I wanted to mention, Gina, is when I looked at the map of the Florida wineries, you're in St. Petersburg, right, Vince?
Yes.
But a lot of them, I'd say the majority of them are in really small towns and rural areas. And they've got to be helping the economy of whatever tiny little town that they are in. I think that they're sort of a rural economic driver that we hadn't thought about.
Right. When you talk about agro-tourism, how big that's getting in the state, with people having their small farms and having activities for families and people to visit and get those organic and locally grown produces. I think that these local wineries, these Florida wineries, just fit perfectly into that. And
they're definitely off the beaten track.
Right.
A lot of them. Chuck, here's the other wine that you brought. Describe this.
Sure. This is a 2017 Noble. It's a red wine, smaller berry. This is the one we like to use for our sangria wines, and it's a great standalone wine, too. This also won a silver medal at the State Fair.
Okay.
So enjoy.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers. The color looks a little bit like a Pinot Noir.
It does. It's light.
I like it. It's nice. I like this astringency. It's good.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah.
What food? This is dry.
Correct.
It's a nice dry red wine. I don't know. I'm thinking lamb chops.
Lamb would be good. Veal would be good.
I
pork,
put this with pork.
possibly. Yeah.
Pork
exactly.
chops, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe even Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
With all of the flavors at the table, it's light enough,
Correct.
but also has enough acidity to go with a mishmash of food that you would have at a holiday table.
Correct. Yeah.
Chuck Hollweg is a hobbyist grape grower and winemaker. Vince Shook is president of Florida Orange Groves Winery. And Gina Birch is host of Grape Minds podcast from WGCU. Thank you all so much. This has been so much fun.
Had a good time. Thank you.
Thank you for asking
Time
us.
has flown by. Very enjoyable.
That's it for this week's show. I want to mention a good book to have if you'd like to visit some wineries. Florida Wine Country, Guide to Northern Wineries by Pamela Watson is a good one to have. And you'll find a link to a map of Florida wineries on our website, thezestpodcast.com. Thank you so much for joining us. If you like what you hear, rate us on iTunes and subscribe. We've also got a great newsletter with cooking tips and recipes and links to our stories that you can subscribe to through our website, thezestpodcast.com. I'm Robin Sussingham. Dalia Colon and I produce The Zest with help from Megan Tremble, Mark Hayes, and Richard Jimenez. The Zest is a production of WUSF Public Media.